Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Thomas Sheridan, who joins us to discuss his latest book, The Anvil of the Psyche. Ask yourself, what is popular culture? How does it come into existence? How do universally accepted ideas of art and creativity, mass media, publishing and financial constructs, and political and social doctrines arise? Are mass social and cultural movements, coupled with one's personal and social identity, always a natural flow of social, economic, philosophical, spiritual, and even artistic threads that run through the collective human experience? Do they organically emerge from the underground to gradually become mainstream cultural and social consensus? And from these options and opinions, do we pick and choose objectively? Do we, as the consumer, the investor, or the voter, make our individual decisions, affiliations, allegiances, and even our emotional attachments determined exclusively by our own choices, by our own will? The answer to all of these questions is no. Hello and welcome, Thomas Sheridan. Thank you very much for joining us once again on legalizefreedom.com.
Hi Greg, I'm delighted to be back.
Now, Thomas, today we're going to talk about your latest book, The Anvil of the Psyche. And I'm going to get you just to set out an overview of that for us. But it seems that a lot of us under an illusion that we actually have free will and freedom of choice, that it is in fact just that, an illusion.
Well, that's the idea behind the book, is that I started to look at my own life. This has been going on for a long time now. But back in the mid-1990s, I worked as a graphic designer, and I basically learned how to fool people with imagery and text and words. And it was basically how corporations were giving people's assumptions regarding everything from data to financial returns and presenting them in such a way that they would make losses look like either, moderate gains or even not so bad. And I remember even minor gains look like large increases in shares and profits and pension funds. And I remember thinking, well, how common is this all through, the commercial world? And I started to see it everywhere, that basically people were given sort of a value system that isn't real. We're given hopes that aren't real, and we're given information from which we attach ourselves belief packages and identity constructs that are not really rooted in anything other than a kind of a motif of our own self-image that's been extrapolated from corporate ideals and has been applied to us. Now, that may sound very harsh and make us all seem like we're robots and idiots and stuff like that. It's not like that at all. It doesn't work that way. It's not like, one day we were simply programmed by an advertising campaign or a marketing program or a political campaign. It doesn't work like that. It begins very, very early on in our education in childhood. And what they do is they basically build an anvil inside our psyche. And this anvil is just like an anvil that a blacksmith would use to create a horseshoe. He has a specific shape of anvil that he needs with the right kind of curves and everything. So when he blows the hammer on it, he can actually shape a rod of hot metal into a horseshoe. Well, the anvil in our psyche works the same way. We're put into the education system as children, and we're deliberately distorted. They make our left brain far more dominated over our right brain. Now, this has two functions. One, it diminishes our ability to create. But secondly, and more importantly, it makes us acquiesce and seek dependency upon control figures and authorities. So we spend the rest of our lives seeking an identity, an opinion from an authority figure. Anyone who can be seen, viewed, or impressed upon as an authority figure is automatically, to us, someone we should look to and give our identity construct to, and therefore their opinions become our opinions. And this happens all through every aspect of our lives. I can remember for years thinking I was a socialist. And when I finally realized, well, why am I a socialist, Bill? Because I came from a working class background, and I'm supposed to be a socialist. And it's quite simply, that's the idea behind the book, that we're given identities that are not actually real. And for the most part, until we break out of this and what we call, a wake up or become awakened later on in life, most people will spend their lives debating, having opinions, and even defending ideas that rooted from everything from culture to politics, and they didn't actually determine them themselves. They were slotted into these positions all through the history and course of their lives.
Now, a lot of what you devote the book to is a sort of breakdown and deep analysis of popular culture. And if we think about this for a minute, it's kind of a nonsense, because my dictionary tells me that popular means to be regarded with favour, approval or affection by people in general, and that culture is the quality in a person or society that arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellent in arts, letters, manners and scholarly pursuits. So it would seem that what is popular in these terms anyway should be diametrically opposed to that which is cultured, or be defined as cultural, or of culture.
Well, let's look on it this way. The most powerful force on this planet today is popular culture. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone is consumed with it, from everything from sport to music to art. And as you said, it's not necessarily the best. Sometimes it is, but generally it's the trashiest stuff. It's the stuff that isn't cultured, and it's the stuff that does not appeal to the people. It's enforced upon them. It's enforced upon them through very clever sciences that use specific methodologies to actually impose these beliefs and these tastes, if you will, on people. Everything is basically subliminal today, and has been since the advent of sort of basically the gramophone. Everything has been kind of subliminal in a way. Songwriting is written with hooks, and with advertising is written with jingles, and it's all rooted in commercialism. The idea is to cater to the lowest common denominator by creating a sort of a one-size-fits-all popular culture, as you say, to appeal to the populace. In reality, it's none of the things it's supposed to be. It's simply just the greatest marketing tool ever invented.
So this accounts really for why, when we do look at popular culture and most of it's rubbish, that there's not necessarily a line you can trace there to that it should therefore be unpopular, because it's designed for a particular purpose, which is not what it first appears.
Well, that's because you'd have the record companies, not so much today, but in the past. Well, nowadays it's people like Simon Cowell and Louis Walsh. But in the past, when somebody was signed for a record act, let's take someone who's truly appalling, like Tiny Tim in the 60s, who sang Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Well, his actual fame was brought about by A&R men and people within the music business, where someone like Jimi Hendrix, who would have been at the same time, his popularity was a grassroots thing that came up at the bottom. Now, yes, that does happen now and again, but decreasingly less so and more in recent times, where the actual pap is the only thing that's out there now. So then again, the idea, it's popular amongst whom? It's popular, the trash culture, the rubbish culture, as you said today, is popular among the people in the control system at the very top, because they know this stuff will appeal to the widest audience. It's exactly like that. And when anything good comes up from the underground, when anything of substance, when anything that touches the actual spiritual soul, that touches people in any way, whether it be hip hop, early heavy metal, punk rock, early goth, you name it, early electronic music, anything, early rock and roll, it's immediately co-opted and brought into the commercial world, and it's suddenly destroyed. You look at someone like Elvis Presley. That first album is a pure rock and roll album. That guy was something, definitely from the grassroots. And within no time, he's on a ship in Hawaii, he's on a boat in Hawaii, singing these awful musical songs, and he's off into the army. Same idea. They do not they're terrified of anything coming up from the underground. They will immediately co-opt it and try and bring it into their system, again, for social and political ideals.
What do you think is happening when you have a rare phenomenon, say, for example, like Michael Jackson, and an album like Thriller, which is, most people will know this, and it's still the best-selling album of all time, because you have there something that's incredibly popular. I mean, his career generally, but that album in particular. But that album actually is really, really good. I think the production, the performance, the songs, they all still really stand up. So is that just that even though Jackson led this terribly controlled, manipulated life and was always intended to be something that wasn't necessarily to do with what he wanted, but it was rather his father and the people around him, the fact that you can produce under those circumstances something so good, does that just hint at the underlying truth, that sort of art and music in particular can be transcendent, and sometimes that just breaks through?
Well, I'm delighted that you said that. I'm delighted that you mentioned that Michael Jackson in that period, how good he was, because he absolutely was. And I'm not a big fan of pop music. I mean, I like heavy music, but I do know quality when I see it. And that album, you're right, the songs do still stand up today. there's also aspects we have to look in or cultural trends. Michael Jackson, I believe, at that album came up at a point when basically American music went flat. They just come out a whole big sort of big band, when it's, arena rock thing like Journey and all these bands like Boston, and they were in decline. This would be the mid 80s, and an alternative scene had never really kicked off in America. And heavy metal, I mean the big heavy metal that was still to come, that wasn't there either. So there was a gap. If you look at the songs in the charts around 83, 84, they were pretty bad. And Madonna would be another one of them that showed up out of the blue. And what happens is that that album came along and it suddenly did sound good. I don't think I'm sure the record companies were absolutely delighted with the success of it, but it had a good producer, Quincy Jones. It had very good musicians on it like Eddie Van Halen and many other people. It had songs, the songs were actually some of the songs were written by people who came out of the sort of arena rock bands like Toto and stuff that was before it. So it was just the right sound for its time. And these things do happen again, where something from that was so good, even at that popular, breaks through. Because I can remember right before Michael Jackson came out with Thriller, he was kind of considered a washed-up child singer. It was very surprising to me at that time when he became such a huge sensation he was. The only reason for that was the quality of the stuff was so good, and at the time, in American music in particular, it was a bit of a cultural wasteland.
We'll come back to music, actually, particularly with my hat on as a music journalist. We'll come back to music several times in our chat, but basically to get back to the underlying message here, pop culture and that which is handed to us in television and in advertising and even from politics sometimes, this is about programming and indoctrination. And this is what essentially, if you try and boil it down to what is this for? You mentioned it earlier, it was commerce. So basically it keeps us doing jobs, most of which are not necessary, to buy this stuff, to consume it, to make money for certain groups and individuals and corporations, get us into debt, where that's the net effect of it, maybe not be designed that way, and that then in turn keeps us in those jobs, and so the circle goes round and round.
Yeah, to sell us an achievable fantasy. So much of the modern lifestyle has been sold from music, all the way from the Beach Boys selling the whole idea of the sun and the girls and the beach and all that kind of thing. It's all come through that. So many of the expectations of people today, and for a long time too, since we were teenagers and even before, has come through popular culture. What kind of car you drive, what kind of clothes you wear, what kind of motorcycle, what kind of even girl you want, how you should behave yourself, how you should address your own existence within your own social or sort of cultural, grouping. It all comes from that. It's all to sell you an achievable fantasy, and a fantasy that's just out of your reach. But it can be achieved. It can be reached. This is a very kind of that American dream idea that everyone can be great. And it ties in very well with the whole thing that Andy Warhol said, that everyone has their 15 minutes of fame in the future. There's so much of that going on. And if you look at underneath it, it's all cultural sort of underwriting. So many of the large record companies, particularly ones like Sony, are involved in many different aspects, just like most of the global and multinational corporations in the last 20 or 30 years. So they'll sell you the singer who sells a certain brand of clothes or a certain brand of car, or even a whole lifestyle. And you'll often find that the companies like Sony, and the other ones, they will have many of the other companies, the other subsidiaries and other companies and other products that will come with that. So everything in popular music, and has been for a while, is one gigantic, and even movies, is one gigantic advertisement.
Well, thinking about the X Factor, which you sort of alluded to there with this 15 minutes of fame, overnight sensation idea, that everyone has the right to this sort of, if not the fame, then certainly a chance to get it. I mean, I watched an episode of the X Factor once, and wouldn't do that again. But the atmosphere to me was almost like, have you seen the film The Island?
No.
Well, it was very much a science fiction film. It was very much about a load of people living in this enclosed society, basically not aware of the wider reality. And they were basically entered into a lottery so that they could then escape. So it was, but a very complex plot. But, well, have you seen the film Logan's Run?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Because the atmosphere in X Factor reminded me of that as well. It was like these people were desperate to basically not be killed. That's what it felt like. It wasn't that they felt they were sharing their creativity or sharing their gift. It was like this was their one chance to not be humiliated. And yet there they were up there, and isn't humiliation a huge part of the X Factor process?
Well, that comes from a very deep-rooted motif within West, and actually all world tradition. And I go over this in the new book. It's the idea of regicide in many sort of pre-Babylonian and many even, right up to fairly recent times in Africa and parts of Asia. And it existed in Europe, and particularly in the Gaelic countries. It was actually at one time, Ireland up until about the 5th and 6th century, this was commonly practiced among the kingdoms, where you would have a mock king, somebody who was a nobody, a peasant or a serf, who would be brought up from the ranks or selected and allowed to be the king for a week. He would have access to the king's concubines. So in some cases, in the African tribes, he could even have sex with the queen. And he would wear the king's robes, enjoy his food, and live in absolute luxury. And then at some point, usually after a week or 5 days, or sometimes it was done according to lunar cycles, he'd be ritually murdered. He'd be murdered in front of the population. And I see that same idea on these shows, not only the X Factor shows, but shows like Big Brother. You're brought in there, given a limited amount of stardom, and then it's taken away from you, and often in the most humiliating ways, where you see yourself on the cover of these awful magazines like Closer, which is interesting in itself, because if you look at that magazine Closer, it's in the newsstands. It's about fallen celebrities, and very often they're people that have their 5 minutes of fame from these kinds of shows. And what they'll often do is, because it says CLOSE, or part of the celebrity or something they'll be holding up, will cover up much of the C, so the actual magazine title says loser. And this is very clever. This is a very clever trick that's played, a very clever sleight of hand. And also, the rest of us who never get this fame, our insecurities, our failings, and all the things we didn't do in our lives, we're jealous of this person who at least got a small period of stardom. So we enjoy tearing them down. We enjoy hating them. So they play on very sort of powerful psychoanalytical ideas of human beings being filled with engineered envies and jealousies. And the idea of the mock king, regicide, lives very much on to this day with an X Factor and Big Brother and those shows.